Welcome to 1202, the Human Factors Podcast. The podcast that covers all things about humans, technology, and particularly the bit in between.
Hi everybody and welcome back to this episode of 1202, the Human Factors Podcast. For hopefully obvious reasons, I go on about the CIEHF or the Chartered Institute of Ergonomics and Human Factors a lot. And I guess I make no apologies for that. It's my professional body here in the UK. But I think in terms of professional bodies, it's important for us to recognise the value of professional accreditation and also the opportunities for CPD and networking that they give. But on this channel, we've been lucky enough to highlight some of the other institutes around the world. And I've been very grateful to be able to interview presidents and past presidents from the USA, from Australia, from New Zealand, to name but a few. But that does lend itself to a bigger question. What about the wider picture? With all these organizations working to generate and develop human factors and ergonomics in their own countries, who's managing that bigger picture? Who's managing that collaboration? I mentioned in one of my speeches, early speeches as president of the CIHF, the need to recognize at the time the global decline in membership numbers, because overall we were seeing a fair bit of shrinkage, particularly in Europe around this. So where do we get to talk about this? Who's bringing that together? What about global issues that face us, such as climate change and them sort of global issues that don't just live in one single country? Well, the organization that looks after that is the International Ergonomics Association, or the IEA. And today's guest is someone I've been wanting to interview for quite a while for a number of reasons. Firstly, he inspired me quite a number of years ago around a lot of the fundamental thinking that went into the development of climate ergonomics, and when we were trying to make it a thing. And he's literally written a book on this stuff and on some of the underpinning principles, and it's like a reference book on the side of my desk for this. We have presented before, firstly at EHF 22 on climate ergonomics, but also more recently, a few weeks ago at the time of this recording, in South Korea at the IEA Triennial. But perhaps more importantly, he's for this topic, he's just become president of the IEA. So we can really get an opportunity to get an understanding of the IEA from a seasoned veteran in the organization and understand its role in our day-to-day. So it gives me a massive and great pleasure to welcome all the way from South Africa, Andrew Thatcher. Andrew, welcome and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Barry. That was a very flattering introduction. Thank you.
So I guess firstly, congratulations on becoming president of the IEA. As far as big jobs go, you've got it. That's the which I believe is for the next 3 years. It's going to be your be all and end all. But I guess before we get into that, I'm keen to know more about you first. So to start off with, can you share with us what you do currently for a day job? That thing that will disappear into nothingness.
So at the moment, I'm nominally a professor of industrial and organizational psychology at a university called the University of the Witwatersrand, which is here in Johannesburg in South Africa. And my job is teaching mostly industrial psychology students who go on to register as professional psychologists. And a small part of that is also students who will go on to register as certified ergonomics professionals.
So, and we sort of get into this. Everybody's got a different origin story. So how did you find out about HF? How did you actually get involved in the first place?
Well, so, I mean, mine actually has UK origins to it, although not directly. When I was first going to university, there was a thing called pre-university school, and I was sitting in my parents' car driving into university to go to this pre-university school, and this guy, English guy, came on the radio, and he was talking about this thing called ergonomics and human factors, and I sat, listened, like captured by what this was all about, because I'd never heard it before, and it sounded really kind of interesting. And I arrived at the university and I went into my psychology lectures, and who should be there but the very person I was listening to on the radio.
Brilliant.
So I got chatting to him, and I was still early days. I mean, I hadn't even started first year university. And anyway, over the years, he became, the supervisor of my final year projects, of my master's, and also of my PhD. He actually had done his master's and PhD at Loughborough University.
Right.
in ergonomics, and he was one of the people who initiated the Ergonomics Society of South Africa, which I didn't know at the time, but I've come to know that. And yeah, he was all the way through the early part of my career. He was my mentor. I'm actually in the position that he was in when he passed away rather suddenly. He had a heart attack, and passed away really suddenly, and I ended up in his position after a period of time.
Right. So if that's where you started, what's been the route? What have you done
Yeah,
so far?
I mean, my PhD work was actually on wayfinding in electronic databases. So how do we find our way around these databases? The database which I chose to look at for my PhD was actually the early internet,
Right.
which doesn't look anything like the internet now. It's at the time it looked far more like sort of library databases. And how we find our way around that. And I spent probably about 10 years after that working on human-computer interaction, focusing mainly on the cognitive side of ergonomics. And then about 14 years ago now, my wife actually changed jobs. She moved from the travel industry into the sustainable built environment.
Mm-hmm.
And talked a lot about green buildings and well-being in green buildings. And I'm going, hang on, this is stuff I know stuff about. I know stuff from the psychological side. I know from the physical side. I know from the ergonomics side. And I started chatting to them, and they realized that actually there was quite a lot of work that wasn't being done in this area. Understanding whether, their holy grail was not just whether it improved well-being, but also whether it had a significant impact on the bottom line. They were thinking if we could show that it improves, moving to a green building improves productivity, then this is the way we want to go, and we can convince everyone to move to at least everyone in an office environment to move to a green building. And so I started off with a number of different projects, and the more I got into that, the more I realized that this actually was an area of passion. My other major at undergraduate level was actually biological sciences, and so I found myself merging the sort of the human factors ergonomic side of things with the biological sciences, and slowly that evolved into understanding issues around sustainability, sustainable development, climate science, and everything sort of really related to that. And I suppose also, growing up in a country like South Africa where we see a lot of poverty, we see a lot of unemployment, we see people on the, on the starvation line, and there's a lot of problems to solve, and these are all interlinked with one another. We can't think about, climate without thinking about how people are living, because to be honest, the people who are causing the biggest amounts of damage to our environment are us, people like me and you, the middle class and the rich people who are actually destroying our planet. It's comparatively compared to the poorer people, they're actually have a much smaller footprint and are operating in a much more frugal style. And so if we're to try to lift those people up, we're going to create other types of environmental problems. So how do we balance these things? Those are sort of fundamental problems that I'm interested in understanding, exploring, and solving.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's where we met in terms of doing the climate change element. How do you, given the, I mean, you've, as I said in the intro, you've literally written the book on this stuff now. How do you feel that we are having an impact into this whole debate?
I'm assuming we're talking about how human factors and ergonomics.
The human factors into the
So there's two answers to this. I mean, at the moment we have a very small impact. That's not to say that there aren't a large number of people doing a lot of really fantastic, great work, because there are. All around the world, there are people working on these problems. But compared to, let's say, something like office ergonomics or the military or even rail and aviation, we have a very small imprint at the moment. In those environments, there's a good and a bad part about it. There's the bad part. Let me start with that first. The bad part is that I think we have a lot to offer, and we're not yet offering that. The good part is that we're not the only part of the solution. Yes. We can't solve these things on our own, and it is working in wonderful interdisciplinary teams, and that's one thing which ergonomics and human factors is really great at. We come from multiple different background disciplines already, and we try to solve problems in a range of different areas. And there are very few of us who actually specialize in one particular area, like aviation or rail. But most of us are dabbling in all sorts of different areas, and we have to work with a wide variety of people. Even if we are in one particular area, we have to deal with engineers and HR people, the people actually operationally on the ground, and all the support mechanisms that helps them support them do those jobs. So we're actually ideally placed to work within this environment.
Yeah, I think there is that description of us as the glue that holds projects together.
Exactly.
But before I divert myself, because I know we have done and will do talk about this topic a lot, we're going to take a quick break, and then I really want to get into the IEA and what does it mean to the layperson. So we'll be back right after this break.
You are listening to 1202, the Human Factors Podcast. We wanted to take the opportunity to say thank you for your support. You can help further by rating us through your podcast provider, sharing us through social media, and telling your friends and colleagues. Let's work together in raising awareness of the value in putting users at the center of what we do.
And welcome back, and I'm here with Andrew Thatcher, the newly enrobed president of the IEA. So, Andrew, for those of who I've got to admit, from when I first started as a practitioner, I knew of the CIHF then was my professional body, but 10, 15, 20 years ago, I had no idea about the IEA and what it was about and that type of thing. I would say there's probably a substantial number of people who don't recognize that there is this body bringing different bits together. So in layman's terms, what is the IEA and what's it there to achieve?
So it is an organization actually set up by the two founding societies, what was the Human Factors Society and the Ergonomics Society, US and UK respectively. And they were looking at trying to grow ergonomics and human factors globally. So in the early 1960s, they set up this, after a series of meetings, set up this International Ergonomics Association. In a way, it's a little bit backwards because it still calls it centers on ergonomics. It gives you a little bit of an idea about who won in terms of the naming rights right at the beginning. But we haven't yet incorporated the human factors into that without making the acronym looking rather laborious. And for the last 60 odd years, it's been looking primarily at growing and supporting ergonomics and human factors around the world. So supporting member societies, what they call federated societies, associate societies, and new countries to understand what is ergonomics about, and helping them develop programs that will develop ergonomics in those countries.
And so within the IEA, I guess there is a number of different working groups and areas of concern, things like that. What are the sort of big issues that it's trying to tackle? Because it's not doing the nitty gritty necessarily that the individual institutes are doing, because that's kind of their role. Yeah. What does it see as its main scope?
Well, it's an interesting question because each president, in some ways, defines that for themselves. But I think the overriding theme is that we don't try to interfere with individual societies. So each individual federated society is serving its own community, and our role really is to offer overall support. So some of the main things which it looks at are some of the things at a global level. So we are represented, for example, on the International Standards Organization, TC 159, which is primarily about human factors and ergonomics, setting standards. So we're represented there. We have representation with a number of other major international organizations like the WHO, the World Health Organization, and the International Labour Organization. And we sometimes have collaborative projects there too. For example, with the ILO, we produced something which was called the Ergonomic Checkpoints, which has now had 600 million downloads.
Wow.
It is the most downloaded document on the ILO's website.
Wow.
Which just gives you an idea about how much, having that type of connection, how much impact we can have at a global level, which you can't really have at the level of an individual society. And it's not even really an individual society's aim to do that. They're looking at it at a much more national perspective. And then there are other projects which happen sort of in a regional perspective. So for example, that might happen, you talked about Europe. So you might have sort of associations of European ergonomic societies that get together. We have something called Ule Ergo, which is in South America, Ergo Africa, which is across Africa, and then two in Asia, one called ACED, ACED, and another one called CINES, which is Southeast Asia. And so we help and support those networks. The actual projects themselves, there are some ongoing projects, like, for example, setting up education programs in countries which don't have educational programs in human factors and ergonomics. So helping them, putting working groups together to help establish these types of ergonomics training programs, to help nascent societies to grow from being nascent, to give them the type of support structure. We give them, helping them connect in with with other types of national bodies and international bodies to give it a little bit more status. So there are those ongoing projects. And then, of course, we try to look at understanding you talked about certification in your introduction, looking at the different certification systems around the world and how we might have types of reciprocity amongst them. And the challenges of having reciprocity. So it's not just about having reciprocity. It's also about because there are different systems and different ways in which people are being certified. We also have, in the Science, Technology and Practice Standing Committee, we also have a series of technical committees. So these operate again at the global level. So it's, if you're interested in a particular area, you can join a technical committee. It's free of charge. There are no charges. You basically get onto a distribution list for people, and if there are international projects or projects which are happening across different areas of the world, it gives you a nice way of being able to connect in and find out who's doing that work. And the technical committees also form an integral part of the IEA's Congress, which happens every 3 years. They help define the issues which we should be looking at. And every now and then, a president might also have some more larger projects that they might need to look at. So I started on the executive committee as the Future of Work Standing Committee chair. So that was about trying to understand the future of work around the world, giving it a global perspective, not just what's happening in the UK or what's happening in France, but to try to understand the global dynamics of the future of work and what's coming out, and to create a tool for an individual country to be able to analyze that for themselves. And that's really what we did there. So it gives you a sense of the range of things which we look at.
Yeah, no, so it's really broad ranging then, and you mentioned each individual president could also put their own sort of spin on it. So let's delve into the presidential role. What before we get into why you wanted to do, what does that role involve? What does being president mean in real terms?
That was a really good. If you'd asked me this 2 weeks ago, I would have been in a very different position to now. I thought it just meant chairing the executive committee and making sure the projects were all going to go in line. But I've realized it's a lot more than that. You essentially are, in a way, the global ambassador for ergonomics and human factors around the world. And that comes with any level of responsibility. That comes with a whole range of politics that sit underneath that, and not just national politics, international politics, which I have to say came as a bit of a shock to me. I'm not a politician. I'm bound to say something stupid somewhere along the line, and I've had to learn a skill of trying to keep a little bit more quiet. letting my brain work before my mouth opens, which I'm still learning. But yes, so it does mean exactly what I was saying, coordinating the executive committee and making sure that they're aligned in all the projects that they're doing, that we fit with our strategic goals, the 7 strategic goals of the IEA, and making sure that we keep aligned with those strategic goals. And also reporting back to council, which is made up of all the different federated societies, who have essentially they're like a board. Mm-hmm. They make sure that we're doing the right things and that we're keeping in the right direction. And then it's so the project, which I suppose where I'm kind of leading to, the project which I'd like to look for in my term, 3 years as the president, is to lead up to the IEA's 65th anniversary. I've got some projects in mind which are kind of being kept under wraps now until I've got all my ducks in a row, and that's going to be the Blue Sapphire anniversary. I think it's got a nice ring to it, and it's also turning around and saying that when this is not a nascent organization. This is it's not a young adult either. This is a mature adult organization now. And we need to celebrate that and celebrate our 65 years worth of achievements, and looking forward to the next 65 years.
So you mentioned about wanting to do the various bits, but at what point did you sort of realize, I guess, you could stand for the IEA? Because as president, I never thought I could stand for president of the CIHF, for example. It wasn't until somebody tapped me on the shoulder and said, I think you could do this, and you're thinking, oh, maybe I could. What was your sort of moment that you sort of realized that it was within your grasp, type of thing?
It was a series of moments, I think. I got asked several times, and my answer was always no. I didn't feel ready for it. There's so many wonderful and fantastic people who've been doing great work around the world, and I couldn't see myself in the same light as them. Maybe it's because I come from a small ergonomics society in a relatively small country at the bottom end of the African continent. So maybe that's a personal kind of issue with it. But I kept on getting these, like you, I kept on getting these requests. Andrew, you'd be great. Why don't you go forward? Andrew, you'd be great. You kind of try this. And eventually it was a series of ex-presidents, a combination of Dave Capel and Andy Amada and Pierre Falzon. So from a variety of different places around the world saying, Andrew, we think you'd be great at doing this. And I still wasn't convinced. And I spoke to some other people on the executive committee, because in order to stand for president of the IEA, you have to have already served on the executive committee. That's one of the rules. And I was expecting other people to kind of stand forward. And 2 other people said, Andrew, I think you would be great, and I would be willing to stand in this position if you were willing to be president. That was my aha moment, when I actually realized that I had a supportive team of people behind me, that it wasn't just me doing it, that it actually was a group of people. And that's the type of philosophy which I'd like to try to have the IEA working on, is that it's not just one person. So I'm, in a sense, a figurehead. But actually, and perhaps your experience of being president of the Chartered Institute was similar. It actually isn't a one-man show. It's a team of people all working towards a common goal. And when I found that I had a team behind me, then I said, okay, you know what, let's go for it. And I'm trying to remember who said this, but it was a point about leadership and saying, actually, our best leaders are the ones who don't want it. Your reluctant leaders. Because they're not there for the power, they're there to do the job. And that's really how I see myself. I'm not here because I'm a figurehead or a power. Or I get to do wonderful trips around the world, but because I have a great group of people behind me supporting us, moving in the same direction. And that's a wonderful place to be.
Brilliant. I mean that sounds like it's a really exciting place to come from. So we can't wait to see what the next 3 years bring with that. You mentioned the team, and yes, you've got the executive around you and them sort of. Do you have what other support do you get? Is there a staff team? Is there that type of thing? Who's doing all the work for you?
Okay, so I mean, compared to a large society like the Chartered Institutes or the Human Factors and Ergonomics Society, we don't have a lot of admin support. We also don't have the same type of revenue flows that they do. I mean, we rely on a combination of capitation fees from conferences, like the IEA Congress, from membership fees, and from sustaining members. And most of the sustaining membership stuff goes towards awards.
Right.
So rewarding people for fantastic work doing it around the world. We have one secretariat person who's done on a part-time basis. But then we have 5 standing committees. So we have 5 standing committee chairs, and each of those standing committee chairs also has co-chairs. So co-chair would be the equivalent of a sort of a sub-chair level, and they would be responsible for each of the different projects, and the standing committee chair then would be looking at oversight across them, and then I'm looking at oversight across that. So a substantial amount of the work is volunteer work, like a substantial amount of work is done in national societies as volunteer work, and we try to capture some of that in terms of hours, just to demonstrate how much work is kind of being put in. But we don't try to be too restrictive around that, because if someone sees how much work it is, they're going to go, well, I don't want to do that. It's too much work. So we're not obsessed with that, but it is worthwhile demonstrating how much person time goes into making sure these activities run. And then there are people who are appointed for specific roles. So we have an ICT director that looks after the website. We have someone who chairs something called the advisory group on standards, who looks at handling the standards and the ISO connection. We have an advisory group for the WHO and an advisory group for the ILO. And again, those are all mostly volunteers and volunteer hours. Some of the people are doing it as part of their normal job. So some of them are, let's say, for example, a member of their national standards body, and they then represent themselves on the ISO. So they're doing that as part of their job of being part of the national standards body, representing themselves on the International Standards Organization. So some of the people are doing these roles, as part of another role. Advisory group for the WHO. These are a lot of people who are already doing a lot of WHO projects anyway, and so liaison is then just becomes part of that role.
So there's a lot of people involved. There's a lot of people contributing to what's going on. So, what do you see as we talked about the IEA being that global view, and we mentioned various things around what the future of our discipline looks like. What's the big global challenges facing us now? What's the big things that IEA needs to grip?
So there's a lot of different ways of answering that question. So I think let me start off by mentioning society and society membership. This is dynamically changing around the world at the moment. So there are areas which are remaining relatively neutral. There are areas which are shrinking, and then there are areas which are growing. So North America and the UK are largely remaining fairly neutral, which is a disappointment, because they put a lot of effort into reaching chartered status, which was expected to grow. Which was and all it's done is remain neutral in terms of. So that's disappointing. And those are issues which we need to look at, especially the areas which are shrinking. You mentioned Europe, and there are some other smaller areas around the world which are also shrinking. And we need to, but at the same time, we also need to support those areas which are rapidly growing. So areas like South America and Asia are on a massive growth curve at the moment, in terms of membership numbers, in terms of growth of projects, in terms of educational programs. And so we need to leverage that growth to grow new areas, and also leverage that growth to understand what is happening in those countries, which can be which could be lessons for countries who are either neutral or shrinking. Are there lessons? I think there are, and so it's we need to find a mechanism of sharing those ideas, and council, the IEA Council is one way of doing those, and I'd like to see us have a lot more interaction between the member societies, federated societies. To answer the question in a slightly different way, there are a lot of challenges facing work. And largely those centralize around 4 different areas. They centralize around informality, although informality means different things in different parts of the world. In the global south, informality means a lot of jobs happening in the entrepreneurial sector, whereas in the global north it means more about the casualization of work.
Right.
So a lot more sort of 0-hour contracts or hybrid types of work systems. So that's the one issue that we need to look at and see how we might get involved in these types of issues. It's a tough one to get involved with, informalization, because as ergonomists, ergonomics professionals, we want to be paid for the work that we do. And if things are becoming casualized and no one's going to pay us to do that work, how do we get involved? How do we provide support for those people, which are 60% of the world's workers are now doing some form of informal work. So unless we start engaging in those types of in that type of work activities, ergonomics and human factors is naturally going to shrink, because we're just going to have a smaller pot of people that we're going to be looking at. Technology is always a big thing, and the big technology drivers at the moment are around issues about artificial intelligence and autonomous systems, and then also related to supportive systems like exoskeletons and, again, AI and automation. These really are sort of supportive systems supporting various different people doing different types of work. And then the thing that you and I are passionate about, climate change and sustainability. Over the next 3 or 4 decades, this is going to fundamentally change the world around us. It's already started with extreme events, and it's going to get worse. These extreme events are going to become more common. If sea levels continue rising at the level which they're going now, higher parts of seaboards will simply disappear, and that means mass movements of people. Just think about all those nuclear power stations, for example, that are sitting on seaboards all over the world. Now, where's all our power going to come from? So these are massive transitions which are going to take place. And so it is characterizing that and preparing national societies to address these issues.
So that's going to keep you fairly busy by the sounds of it.
Yeah, I'm not doing all of that myself. You asked earlier, that's a lot of people. We did a count in the last IEA triennial report, and it was 275 people were engaged at some points in supporting the work of the International Ergonomics Association directly.
So you mentioned about the 65th that you want to work towards. That aside, what do you hope to achieve in your 3 years? At the end of it, what will allow you to look back and say, "Yeah, job well done"?
My sense of humor turns around and says that I'm not mad and insane at the end of it. If I look back and say I haven't driven myself mad, then I'm going, okay, mission accomplished. But no, I mean more seriously. I think if I've left the world of ergonomics a stabler place, then I would be happy. And that means for me making sure that high quality education systems are supported around the world, and that there is a strong repository of material that can be drawn on. That sets high standards for the way in which ergonomics and human factors is taught around the world, and also making sure that we have successful outreach to all the organizations which we have MOUs with. There's some really interesting projects coming through from the ILO on informality. This is one of their projects, the ILO's project going forward for the next 5 years. And I think we can play a role in showing what we can do. Updating the ergonomic checkpoints, again, if 600 million people have downloaded it, and it was last produced in 2003, that's 20 years ago, we can update those checkpoints. And or we can look at producing them in for different industries, being a little bit more specific for checkpoints for different industries. And we can also look at broadening our language reach. At the moment, everything's predominantly in English. But actually, I talked about where the growth areas are. Our growth areas are not in English. Yeah. And if we're still to have relevance, we need to make sure that we support in the activities in different languages. It's uncomfortable for someone who's like myself, who's grown up speaking English and has a smattering of other languages, but not really fluent in any of them. But I think it's quite an exciting initiative just to kind of make sure we support that. And the final thing is to make sure that our main organizations, the chartered institutes, the Human Factors and Ergonomics Society are adequately represented, and they feel that the IEA is their home. They started it, and in a lot of ways it is their home, but they've largely been disengaged. I had to say this over the last sort of 10 or 20 years, despite the fact that they've had presidents, at least two from America, Andy Amada and Kathleen Mosier from the US, but I don't think it really infiltrated into their organizations. And I'd like to make sure that they become part of the family again.
I mean, I guess certainly from a UK perspective, with the next IEA Congress being in London, then if we don't grasp that opportunity by then I guess we never will. So let's fingers crossed that we do that.
Yeah. I think the Chartered Institute almost has a vested interest already, and they will have Becky Charles and Ben Peachy represented on the executive committee. And as you said, IEA 2027 is in London. Really looking forward to that. It's a fantastic city. It's one of the homes of ergonomics and human factors. It's bound to be a bumper event. So looking forward to it.
Fingers crossed. So, with the exception of IEA 27, obviously, if there was one event you're looking forward to over the next 3 years that you think, I can't miss that, as president, I really want to be doing that or going to that. Have you got one in mind?
I don't actually. I've thought about it, and there isn't a single event that I kind of have in mind. So I would really like to come to the Chartered Institutes conference again. It's been a while since I've been there in person. I think it was 2013, although I've done a couple of online sessions during COVID. I would really like to go to the Human Factors and Ergonomics Society and promote the stuff with them. So I don't really have any sort of single place. I think one of the problems that we think of with being the international global, it's really just like a place where you can go and travel. It's a travel agency to travel around the world. And I don't really see it as that. I mean, we're trying to change that idea and actually talk about our missions actually are ambassadorial missions. Going places where we are needed and where we can help grow, support, or bolster what is already there. Not to instigate. I don't think we're really there to instigate any sort of action. Action has to be regionally or nationally developed, and where we can add value, we will go. So I'm excited about doing that. Excited about going places where we needed.
So I guess there's that open offer then to all the societies who are watching. If you need a bit of Andrew's time to come and bolster your project or whatever it is you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, and not just my time, all the officers, and in fact, we'd like to do this. I mean, bring it in such a way that we've got a executive committee member that's closer, and it's a lot cheaper to bring someone there. To rather use it that way rather than have me fly from the bottom end of Africa to all parts of the world. We actually have representation in all continents in all continents. So we've got representation now on all continents, and so it's about finding the best person to kind of best person or the best people if it involves a group of people coming there.
Cool. So yes, members of the IEA coming to you sometime soon.
Yes.
No, Andrew, thank you for that. I mean, I think hopefully that has given a lot of people a lot more insight into what the IEA does, and maybe really broadens that idea that it is, there's a lot of people involved and getting involved in a wide variety of things. What we're going to do now is we're going to take our final break, and then we'll come back with the final three questions.
Look forward to it.
Gets to the final three. My name's Nick Rome. Let me tell you about this. Technology in our world is evolving at a phenomenal pace, and keeping up with what that means in the human factors world can be challenging. That's where Human Factors Cast comes in. Human Factors Cast is a weekly podcast that highlights and breaks down stories that are chosen by you, the Human Factors community.
New York State is giving out hundreds of robots as companions for the elderly.
Buttons in cars are safer and quicker to use than touchscreen.
A prototype just achieved a major milestone that actually fits the description of a flying car.
The show provides perspective based on experiences from different domains and different industries. We even cover some of the hottest conferences in the field. On this episode, we're recapping EHF, Ergonomics and Human Factors Conference, Neuroergonomics Conference, Human Factors and Ergonomics Society, UXPA International. Join me, Nick Rome.
And me, Barry Kirby.
Every Friday morning when Human Factors Cast drops on YouTube and your favorite podcast directory. And remember,
it depends.
And now I'm going to send it back over to Barry for the final three.
I think it's fair to say, for those of you who do follow Human Factors Cast, that this whole idea of it being a weekly thing is slightly on a hiatus. We're more on a fortnightly when we can fit it in type thing at the moment, mainly because Nick's got a new role and mine started when I was president, and then he's just gone there. But we are trying to keep a bit of a drumbeat at the moment, so we'll see how that goes. Andrew, we asked the same three questions to everybody who comes on, and so let's go with number one. What do you have a book or a paper that you use repeatedly as your sort of go-to piece? I mean, it could be technical fiction, but do you have that? Do you have that go-to that go-to reference?
I actually have three that sit on my desk perpetually. It's
Cool.
Rasmussen's 1997 paper on systems. I think it's called Risk Management in Dynamic Society. In a Dynamic Society. John Wilson's work also on systems, 2014 paper, defining sort of systems and systems ergonomics, and Gunderson and Holling's book, which will not be familiar to most ergonomics and human factors people. It's because they're a bunch of biologists, and they develop a thing called panarchy, and a lot of my theory and thinking is developed off panarchy and panicky understandings. So that's regularly stuff that I turn to.
Brilliant. So if you go back in time to a time that suits you, younger self in some way, what bit of advice would you give yourself?
I love this question. There's so much advice I would give myself. I think the first bit of advice I would give to myself is, I think I tried to do too much really early in my career and didn't give myself enough time to think about what direction I wanted to go in. But at the same time, the thing I'd also give my younger self is be soft on yourself. You're not always going to get it right. And so, those two things with one another, don't try too hard and be soft. When you find your passion, you will take off.
Bro. So then fast forward a whole bunch of years and you decide to retire, if that's such a thing anymore. I'm not entirely sure. But what would you like to be remembered for?
I think I'm at this stage. I'm sort of hoping that I'll die before I retire. So we'd have to sort of think what would they write in their obituary. I think the bottom line, the way I live my life really is just kind of like, did I make a difference? Did I make a positive difference? Mm-hmm. Even if it's one person's life, did I make a positive difference in that person's life? If one person could turn around and say, I would not be the person I am today without having that person in my life, that would make me happy.
Brilliant. Andrew, thank you ever so much for spending the time to chat to us and share with us about your new journey that you're going on, and also how you got there. If people want to get in touch with you and inquire more about any of the different facets, how would they go about doing so?
So I mean, we always want interested in people who want to volunteer, who want to put their time, if you've got an interesting idea. So my email at the IEA is quite easy. It's president@iea.cc. That's the easiest way to get hold of me. You can also welcome to find me through the various different social media channels. I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Facebook. I'm nominally on X, though I don't really do anything there. And I'm nominally on Instagram, but that's mainly to use as a repository for all my photos. So the easiest way is through the email address.
Brilliant, thank you. And thank you all for listening and watching wherever you're consuming this content. Wherever you're consuming it, do like, comment, share, tell your peers about what's going on. The best way we can spread the word about what we're doing here in the human factors domain is through your recommendations. If you've got questions, thoughts, or ideas about what Andrew's spoken about today, do comment and on whatever platform you're doing it on, and then we will do our best to find that and respond to it. As for now, we will say thank you all very much, and we will see you on the next episode.
Thank you for listening to 1202, the Human Factors Podcast. Please do get in touch with your thoughts, questions, and comments. You can contact us on social media such as Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook at 1202 Podcast. See you next time. And remember, it's more than just common sense.